What's up, guys? So today we're going to be talking about computer auditing. We particularly want to focus on the general controls. It's going to be a short video, not going to be too long, and so we just want to get through some of the basics in the general controls. And then we'll have future videos that will be dealing with other parts of this cycle or of this section of the work. Okay, so the first thing I want to just talk to you about and what we're going to be doing today is we will be looking at understanding the different components of the internal control, and then we're going to be talking about general application controls. In a different video, we'll be assessing physical, logical controls, going a bit more in depth, and then doing program controls, program change controls. And then finally, we'll be finishing off in our third video with interface management and other topics. Okay, so firstly, I just want to introduce the idea of an IT environment. So in terms of a audit, we have the internal control environment of the client, and within the internal control environment, we deal with the IT environment. Now, the IT environment is a particularly important part of the control cycle and the control system at a client. So we want to emphasize that there is no audit that happens in the 21st century today that does not require the auditor to be competent in terms of their IT ability and the IT technology that is used. And so it's almost impossible to think about or conceptualize an audit without an IT component. The purpose of the IT environment, just like other controls, is to ensure that we produce financial data that is reliable. We also want to ensure that the operations of the client function effectively and efficiently. Now, the first part is the first objective of the control is important for us as auditors because we want to test that the data coming out of the system is reliable. The second part is more of importance to management because management is worried about efficiency and effectiveness. We become worried about, as auditors, we become worried about efficiency and effectiveness when we're looking at going concern and when we're looking at management and stewardship of the directors, then we become worried about it, but it's not our primary concern. Another important concern for the auditor, though, is compliance with laws and regulations. As we know, IRBA does not require us to be police officers in terms of making sure that companies rely or comply with the laws and regulations. But if we do find non-compliance at our audit client, we then need to look deeper into the financial statements and understand why there is this non-compliance and where it is happening and who is responsible. So therefore, the last objective is also critically important to us as auditors. The main components which you've seen before, right? The main components of any internal control environment are labeled at the top here. So we have a control environment, we have risk assessment, we have information system, we have the control activities and the monitoring of the controls. Now, as I've said before to you, the control environment I normally describe as the air around the control. So everything surrounding the control. It is not particularly the actual control that is done, okay? So let's go back to that slide. So when I'm talking about the air around the control, I'm saying, what is it that management, that staff, that the culture of the client is relating to that adds or inhibits a certain control? When I say adds, I mean improves the ability for the control to work. When I say inhibits, I mean stops the ability for the control to work. So I want us as auditors to go now and dig deep and try and find out what that control environment is like. So when we're looking at it from an IT perspective, we want to understand how does management view IT? Is it an important part of management's decision making? When management makes a decision, do they take into account the IT perspective? For example, when management is assigning duties and responsibilities, are we making sure that management takes into account the duties and responsibilities of IT management and the IT department? Does the IT department have representation on the board of directors? So this gives us an idea of what the environment is like. And like I said when I started out, it's sort of the air or the things surrounding the actual control. When we're talking about risk assessment, we are talking about so now we've moved on to point 2. When we talk about risk assessment, we are talking about, and this is why I've got a little I here, we are talking about looking out for IT risks. Is management constantly looking out for IT risks? Now, management may very well delegate it to a subcommittee to look out for IT risks. But we want to understand, like, is management assigning appropriate measures and appropriate responsibilities to someone who is looking out for IT risks? Are IT risks given the gravity that they need? So we want to look at IT risks and how management is dealing with IT risks. Then when we look at information technology systems, this we're actually talking about the hardware and the software. Is there required computers? Are there required computers? Are there required software that is available at the client for the staff and the employees and the IT department to use and utilize in order to meet the objectives? And the objectives are what we just covered in the last slide. So we want to ask ourselves, are there enough resources? So this point 3 is talking about resources. Second to last, our control activities. When we talk about control activities, here we are actually interrogating the activities that both the IT department and management and staff and employees are doing. Now, it's very easy to identify control activities because there is a doing word. There must be someone is doing something. So far, we only were dealing with the peripheral around the control. A control activity is the actual control. Why do I say we were dealing with the peripheral? Because first we spoke about the control environment, which is very high level. What are people thinking? What are people saying? That sort of stuff. Then we said, how is management looking in and finding the risks? Then once management has done that through the risk assessment, does management provide the necessary resources to the right people? So is there the correct hardware and software? But now when we're talking about control activities, we're saying, are the people actually doing the right activities? What are the activities? What are the things that employees, management, IT staff, what are the things that they are doing in order to make sure that the objectives of a control are being met? So this is where the actual control is living. It's living in point 4. And then finally, after the control has been performed, now this is retrospective. So looking back, we're looking back on the control. We want to see, has the control worked? Has it identified what it's supposed to identify? And have we gotten the necessary information? So monitoring controls is really after the fact. We're assessing the ability of the control to detect and to meet the objectives of the control. Okay. So first, let's start off with the control environment and talk a little bit more detailed about the control environment. So in the control environment, we want to understand what is the integrity of management around the control environment. What is the culture? Is there a code of behavior? We need to come to grips with, does management employ the right people, put the right people into IT? What is IT's management looking like in terms of skills? Do they have the required degrees, the required experience in order to lead the IT department? When I talk about organizational structure here, I want to know, firstly, so there's 2 very important things that we must keep in mind when we talk about IT and organizational structure. The first is that the IT department must be separate from other departments. Why? Because if people in other departments are able to access and manipulate the IT environment, okay, they are able then to override controls. So we don't want anyone who is not part of IT to have access and have the responsibilities that the IT department has. That's very important. Okay, but then within the department, there also needs to be certain segregation of duties. So, for example, within the IT department, the person that is dealing with user queries cannot be the programmer. Because if the programmer is able to deal with user queries, the programmer will then understand how to break the control or how to override the control, and he will be able to do that given his skill set. So the programmer should never be involved with end user queries and that sort of stuff. The programmer must be only involved with development and maintenance of the system, and not with resolving queries, because his skill set makes him very dangerous in terms of overriding of controls. So we want to keep that in mind, that there not only must be segregation of duties between the IT department and other departments, but also segregation of duties between members of the IT department, so that no one member is given too much power. Okay. One of the things that we want to follow up with and talk about is the HR processes. Now, HR processes are critically important in the IT department because IT is an exceptionally skilled department. There are very, very skilled resources required in the IT department. And so when we talk about hiring people in the IT department, we need to ask ourselves, do they have the requisite skills? Have they gone through the required training as well as the required vetting? When I talk about vetting, I'm talking about background checks. Have they done the correct background checks on these types of people? It's very important that we look into the HR processes of the IT department. Then we want to have, now these are secondary, less important parts of the IT environment. We want to talk to and understand, how are those charged with governance. Generally, when we talk about those charged with governance, we're talking about the governing body or the board of directors. How is the governing body involved in IT governance? Is there someone who represents the IT department on the governing body? How does the governing body understand? What is the mechanism for understanding what's happening in the IT department and what risks are affecting the company? So when we talk about that, sometimes we may not, for example, have an IT director. Then we need to have an IT steering committee to act as an IT director. Okay, help desk is where we have people that, as I mentioned, dealing with queries of end users, and security. We're going to talk more about security, so I'm not going to talk too much about it now. Okay, so now let's talk about the difference between general controls and application controls. So in general controls, we are dealing with a framework, an overall framework of the computer activities. So we are not dealing with specific applications. When I talk about general controls, I'm talking about how do I enter and access a computer, for example, right? I'm talking about where are computers stored. I'm talking about who has access to our computers. So it's very different from an application control, because in an application control, we're actually dealing with specific applications. When I talk about applications, I'm talking about, for example, the software used to prepare financial statements. Who has access to that software? Who is able to come into that software? So application controls is dealing with specific applications. General controls are dealing very high level with the control environment, with the access to computers and software, access to hardware and software. And so we need to get to grips with that difference, right? So application controls, very detailed access to specific applications. General controls, more dealing with the environment, more dealing with access to computers and software. Okay, so we're going to leave it there for today. We will pick up in video 2 right from the slide, and we'll go on to the next part of the lecture. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.